Good morning, welcome back. Today is July 4th, and as you can see that I have temporarily won the battle of plant versus person at the table. I'm sure that's going to change, but let's talk about this day. And of course, for those of us in the United States, today is July 4th, a day that, according to John Adams, was supposed to be celebrated with fireworks and celebrations. Actually, he was talking about July 2nd because that's the day that the Declaration of Independence was actually signed, and it was actually proclaimed on July 4th. And then, of course, there's also the argument that the U.S. wasn't truly independent until the Treaty of Paris, 1783. That is when Britain recognized the fact after the end of the American Revolution. But let's not confuse the myth of American independence on July 4th and enjoy the fireworks. But a lot of other stuff happened on this date, surprisingly, so let's talk about some of those things. First of all, it was on this date in 1754 that Colonel George Washington surrendered Fort Necessity to the French and abandoned it. Now, this was part of what was to become known as the 7 Years' War in England and the French and Indian War in the United States, or actually in the North American colonies. And essentially what it is the French had taken up a position in Ohio, and Washington and his people were sent in to move them, to take over what was called Fort Duquesne at the time. Failing that, Washington set up this fort in the southwest corner of Pennsylvania. Not really very big, quite small as a matter of fact, but it was a fort nonetheless. The French didn't like that. The French surrounded it, demanded he leave. He surrendered on July 3rd and abandoned the fort on July 4th. This is generally considered to be the start, the unofficial start, I guess, of the French and Indian War, which was to go on until 1763. And it's also where George Washington got his military experience and his colonel rank that he was using at the start of the American Revolution. Speaking of great moments in American history, it was on this date in 1803 that the Louisiana Purchase was announced. The Louisiana Purchase, purchasing pretty much a huge amount, about double the size of the United States at the time. All of the land west of the Mississippi. I'm going to put a picture here. That's part in the center, that discolored part in the center, a different color part I should say in the center. That's the Louisiana Purchase. Also on this date in 1817, the Erie Canal was begun. The Erie Canal, which was connecting, I believe, the Hudson River with Lake Erie, and that began a period of canal building in the United States, which included the building of the Illinois and Michigan, the I&M Canal, something that is near and dear to those of us who live down here near Lockport. The I&M Canal, if you're ever in the area, stop by, I will show it to you. It's great fun. On this date in 1845, Henry David Thoreau took up residence on Walden Pond, on a shack in Walden Pond, and he lived there for 2 years and wrote a book about his experience called On Walden Pond. This is the book there where the famous saying, "The great mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." This comes from Thoreau, living on Walden Pond. Began on this date in 1845. In 1881, the Tuskegee Institute was founded. First off, that's a start. It was a school for African American teachers. It was created as a result of a compromise between not really a compromise, but a political deal that a Senate candidate said that if African Americans supported him in Alabama for his reelection, he would see to it that a school was developed. And so the African Americans supported him. The candidate won, and the candidate followed through on his promise, and the Tuskegee Institute was formed. Its first president is Booker T. Washington, a well-known African American leader of the late 19th, going into the 20th century. One of the early professors at the school was George Washington Carver, a great scientist, did all the work with peanuts and all of that kind of stuff. You may remember that. Tuskegee Institute is now Tuskegee University and is considered to be one of the HBCUs, the historically black colleges and universities in the United States. So again, still operating in Tuskegee, Alabama. In 1883, Buffalo Bill's first Wild West show premiered. Now, we've talked about Buffalo Bill's show before. It's just kind of interesting, some of the things that we're doing there, including recreation of hangings and gun battles and shootouts, and at some point he started recreating the Battle of the Little Bighorn. But that took place on this date in 1883. On this date in 1892, Western Samoa changed the international date line so that there were actually 367 days that year, and they picked July 4th to be the day that was repeated. So there were 2 July 4ths in Western Samoa on this date in 1892. In 1901, William Howard Taft became the first Governor General of the Philippines. Here's a picture of Taft on a water buffalo taken in the Philippines. He was there for a few years and was really enjoyed it and thought that he was going to spend his whole life there. He was working with Theodore Roosevelt, with whom he became his vice president, and then he was chosen to succeed Roosevelt, and Roosevelt turned on him, et cetera, et cetera. Taft also was the first, and I believe so far the only president to be nominated to the Supreme Court. He actually became the Supreme Court justice shortly after he left office, or sometime after. I don't exactly know when, but he did go on to the Supreme Court. On this date in 1939, Lou Gehrig was the first baseball player to have his number retired, and that number was 4. So the first baseball player to have a number retired, Lou Gehrig, had a Lou Gehrig Day, and this is where he made the famous "I am the luckiest man on earth," despite having been stricken with the ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, what we now refer to as Lou Gehrig's disease. If you saw the movie, you've seen it, you've seen that scene. But that was on this date in 1939. And finally, on this date in 1944, the flag was raised on Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima, the island in the Pacific, as part of World War II, that very famous picture. Now, the picture itself was taken sometime later. That was a staged photo. Like a lot of the pictures from World War II that are iconic were oftentimes staged. MacArthur landing at the Philippines, that was a staged picture. This picture was recreated later, but the actual event took place on this date in 1944. Birthdays today. 1804, Nathaniel Hawthorne was born. Nathaniel Hawthorne, famous for the Fall of the House of Usher and the Scarlet Letter, was born on this date in 1804. 1826, American songwriter Stephen Foster was born. He wrote such songs as Beautiful Dreamer, My Old Kentucky Home, Swanee, Oh Susanna, a lot of the famous Americana songs of the 19th century, written by Stephen Foster, born on this date in 1826. On this date, in 1883, cartoonist Rube Goldberg was born. Rube Goldberg became famous for creating cartoons showing very complicated ways to do very simple things. You may have seen comics of his, you may have seen comics very much like his, and even to this day, people talk about a Rube Goldberg-esque way of doing things when they're talking about a very complicated way to do what should be a very simple thing. He was born in this date in 1883, and finally, 1918 was on this date that Abigail Van Buren, better known to most of us as Dear Abby, was born. She was born on this date in 1918, and some of you remember that her sister, Ann Landers, also was popular for doing the same thing, what in England they call an agony aunt column, an advice column where people write in and say, Dear Abby, and people would talk about what does Dear Abby say. Okay, interestingly, deaths on this date. It was on this date in 1826 that both former presidents John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died. Okay, they both died 50 years to the day after the proclamation of the Declaration of Independence. I know Adams in particular was supposed to appear that day. He was 90 years old. It was somewhat questionable. And it is reputed that Adams' last words were "Jefferson lives," which is somewhat ironic because Jefferson had actually died a few hours earlier. But they both died on this date in 1826. Adams was 90 years old and Jefferson was 83. And also, in 1831, the fifth president of the United States died. That is James Monroe, best known for the Monroe Doctrine. He died on this date in 1831. So interestingly, if you think about it, on July 4th, 3 U.S. presidents died. Considering the fact that there have only been 47, actually 46, because one of them was president twice, having there only been 46 presidents, July 4th is a very bad day for presidents in terms of surviving. So, something to keep in mind. All right. Well, with that, we're going to get back to talking about Isaiah today. I'm going to make some ground talking about Isaiah as he deals with some of the discussions about Egypt and Cush and oracles. That's the word I was looking for, oracles. So, happy Independence Day for the U.S. citizens out there, and let's get back to talking about Isaiah. Good morning, welcome back. We are continuing our study of Isaiah. Today we're going to start with Isaiah 18, continuing the discussion of a series of oracles. Oracles, these judgments, proclamations, statements made about the nations surrounding Judah and Israel. Quick review, first 5 chapters of Isaiah are the indictment of the nation. Isaiah 6 is Isaiah's commission. 7 through 9 are the chapters concerning the test of Ahaz with the children, the 3 or 4 children involved. And then beginning with chapter 11 and 12, we get into a series of oracles, these pronouncements about these nations that surround Judah and Israel. Now, again, they're not necessarily oracles to the nations. They're not necessarily messages that Isaiah delivered to these various nations, although he may very well have. But they are more assurances for the people at the time, saying, don't worry, these guys are going to get theirs, and kind of talking about them. Okay? So, and that's, we're in the middle of that section, kind of talking about these different nations surrounding Judah and Israel. Okay? One other thought, Judah is the southern kingdom. Again, remember there had been a united kingdom. Israel is in the north, Judah is in the south, and divided after the death of Solomon. And Isaiah is a prophet in the southern kingdom. Okay, the southern kingdom, Judah and Benjamin, usually called Judah, actually stays around until about 586 BC. The northern kingdom falls in 701. Actually, it's kind of a long process, but ultimately by 701 BC, they've fallen themselves. Okay, so we've talked about Babylon, and we talked about Assyria, and today we're going to talk about mostly we're going to talk about Egypt, okay? But first off, we're going to talk about the area called Cush. Okay, so in chapter 18, beginning with verse 1, says, "Ah, land of whirring wings that is beyond the rivers of Cush, which sends ambassadors by the sea in vessels of papyrus on the waters." Okay, so this is not necessarily an oracle about Cush. What is Cush? Cush is an area along the Nile. So we're going to, again, the Nile River is in Egypt. It's on, if you picture Africa, you can see it's on the northeast side, okay, going north and south there. Okay, now on the southern side of the Nile River, you've got this area of Cush. Basically, it's around where the nation of Ethiopia is today. Okay, you're in the general vicinity. Okay, obviously the borders are not exact. But it's in that general vicinity. And apparently, now we don't, this is kind of just speculation based on what the text says. Apparently, one of the things about this nation of Cush, or this area of Cush, was that they were known for creating messengers, people that could travel up and down the Nile quickly, that they could get things. And so that's kind of the point. And here, the gist of it is, and several commentators, Oswald, one of them looks at it and says, yeah, see, the Lord is saying in chapter 18, okay, Cush, I want you to take a message. Okay, now he's going to kind of elaborate a little bit on that. But let's get back into it. So it says, "Ah, land of whirring wings, that is beyond the rivers of Cush, which sends ambassadors by the sea in vessels of papyrus on the water. Go, you swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared near and far. a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. Okay, so here, go messengers, go to a land. Okay, now, is this a particular message that he's talking about? And it could be. But then when we get into the next verse, it kind of makes you think that, the Lord is just saying, listen, I'm going to send messengers all over the place. Because here in, let's see, where is this? At verse 3. All you inhabitants of the world, you who dwell on the earth, when a signal is raised on the mountain, look. When a trumpet is blown, hear. For thus the Lord said to me, I will quietly look for my dwelling, like a clear heat in the sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. For before the harvest, when the blossom is over and the flower becomes a ripening grape, he cuts off the shoot with his pruning hooks, and the spreading branches he lops off and clears away. They shall all of them be left to the birds of the prey of the mountains, and to the beasts of the earth, and the birds of prey will summer on them, and all the beasts of the earth will winter on them. Okay, so the passage is talking about the Lord says, okay, I'm going to get these messengers, and they're going to send these messages out. So it's kind of a summary. It's sort of like a mid-course summary of what the Lord is talking about throughout this entire passage, or these entire chapters 12 through 35, where he gets in all these different warnings and different oracles. Okay, he says, listen, I'm just going to get messengers, and I'm going to send them to all of these different nations. Okay, again, not necessarily a particular nation, although it could be, but it is vague in the way it's written, so we don't actually know. Okay, but here it says, all you inhabitants of the earth, going back to verse 3, you who dwell on the earth, when a signal is raised on the mountain, look. So again, with the signal on the mountain thing, okay, this is a theme that Isaiah picks up over and over again. This whole idea that there's going to be a signal, and that the Lord is going to release a signal, and that's going to warn people or bring people to him, nations to him, to do his bidding. Okay, and then he goes on. So this is what the Lord says. The Lord is just going to kind of look over and go, okay, it's time. There's sort of a very calm way to it. So the Lord said to me, I will quietly look for my dwelling. So the Lord is just going to sort of look over and go, oh, okay, time for that one. Time to take care of this one. Time to take care of this one. Okay. For before the harvest, when the blossom is over and the flowers become a ripening grape, he cuts off the shoots with pruning hooks. Okay. Talk about different gardening things, that the gardener looks and sees, okay, well, today is the day I'm going to prune that, or today is the day I'm going to prune that. So with that intentionality, and I think is the interesting thing about that things, and I can attest to this, being married to the gardener wife, that garden things don't generally happen by accident. Okay, and there isn't a lot of very reactionary stuff like, oh, we have to do this right away. It's sort of a long, ongoing, constant process of improvement and maintenance and correction and addition and all of these kind of things that go on. And I think this is sort of a reassurance to those that are listening to say, because they want something to happen right now. It's kind of if you're a new gardener or for the first time you plant a seed. Remember, there's a old story Frog and Toad we used to read to the kids years ago. But in one of these particular stories, one of them, I don't remember which one, Frog or Toad, plants seeds in the garden, and immediately the next day wants to know why they haven't grown. But it's a slow process. So, you plant today, and then somewhere down the road, a day, a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, whatever the case may be, then it comes up. And so it's planned. Okay. And so the Lord, going back to his thing about his purpose, that, my purpose is set. This is what's going to happen. Just like a gardener plans out his garden. This is how it's going to go. I'm going to get these messengers. I'm going to send them out, and everything's going to be great. And at that time, verse 7, after all of the things, this pruning, this gardening imagery that he's going to do with these nations, at that time, tribute will be brought to the Lord of hosts. Okay, referring back to that idea of in that day, that future day, when these nations will come together. Okay, so from a people tall and smooth, from a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. Okay, so again, this could be a general thing, or he could be talking about Egypt, because that would make sense. It does kind of fit in that, Egypt is a land and the Nile River comes pretty much right through the middle of it, that it kind of divides it. So that could be, and that does fit the general thing. And if you want to go with that, okay, that's great. But these messengers, and this is just all part of God's purpose. Let's see. That time tribute will be brought, verse 7, from these people to Mount Zion, the place of the name of the Lord of hosts. Okay, so again, compare this back to Isaiah chapter 2, where he talks about tribute coming in the day of the Lord. And I remember we talked about when is it that the nations are going to study war no more and all of that, when they're bringing tribute to the Lord. And it's interesting because this small section on Cush here in chapter 18 talks about the end result of this being tribute brought to the Lord. And this is, again, a repeated refrain or theme throughout Isaiah, that the judgment that the Lord is talking about is not the end. Okay, it is not the end in itself. The judgment is the means to an end, and the end is restoration. The end is all of these people coming to the Lord, coming to Zion. Okay, so again, judgment is not an end. Judgment is a means to an end. Okay, it never ends with just judgment. This is for the purpose of bringing these people into the kingdom. Okay, so he's talking about this in general, and now he's specific in chapter 19, and this is where I'm going to spend most of the time, 19 and 20 today, talking about Egypt. Now, if you remember your African geography, and I know we all do, just want to talk a little bit about Egypt. Okay, Egypt is a nation that has been significant since the book of Genesis. It is still there. Okay. And it is still in pretty much the same location. Of course, the borders are a little weird, not weird, but changed. Okay, and the best thing, or the most important thing about the nation of Egypt, is the Nile River. And I'm going to try and remember to put a picture here of the Nile River here, kind of a map of the Nile River. But just in case I don't, the Nile River, if you know anything about the Bible, or if you've looked at any of the maps in the back of your Bible, you've seen it. So you've got Africa. So Africa is this big country, big continent, and in the upper northeast corner you've got Egypt, and then you've got the Nile River with all the different tributaries, and then you see it snaking down. Interestingly, the Nile River flows from the south to the north. Okay, it's one of those kind of counterintuitive, not just because you look at it and you see that this is a river, and you automatically think because water goes downhill, you think that the river goes from here to here. Well, it doesn't. It goes from the south to the north. Okay, which is interesting because what that means is that, and they talk about the upper and the lower Nile River, or the upper and lower region. And so the lower region, the lower Nile, is the northern part, whereas the upper Nile is the southern part. Okay, so again, it's a little, if you're looking at it, if you're coming at it from a Western map orientation, you kind of think, well, upper would be the north, because when we talk about the upper part of the United States, we're talking about the north. But when we're talking about the upper part of the Nile River, we're talking about the south. Okay, so fun little geography today. This might be on your test. So chapter 19 and 20 is a denunciation of Egypt. But it's interesting because Egypt has it's interesting because it ends on a positive note. Okay, again, talking about this, judgment is not the end. Okay, in fact, 19 and 20, there's three relatively simple sections here. The first 15 verses of chapter 19 talk about Egypt's helplessness. Okay, just kind of like the indictment of Israel in chapters 1 through 5, here verses 1 through 15 just talk about, it's kind of like an indictment of Egypt. Okay, and then 16 through 25 talks about the turn. Okay, the idea that Egypt will someday turn to God. Okay, now when we get to it, we'll talk about whether this is a particular thing. Has it already happened? I don't believe so. Is this part of the grander picture? I think is the more accurate thing about that day of the Lord, or that day post judgment, when all nations are coming, including Egypt, to Zion. And then in chapter 20, there's a quick little story there in chapter 20, and it kind of illustrates the foolishness of trusting Egypt. Okay, and we'll get to that one in a couple of minutes. Okay, now before we go on to talk about 19, this particular oracle, I want to review real quick the story in Genesis of Joseph in Egypt and all of that, because this is significant, because that's kind of what the images are throwing back to. Okay, so if you remember in Genesis 37, you've got Joseph. Okay, so you've got Abraham. Well, actually, going back further, Abraham is chosen. He goes to Israel. Abraham has name turned to Abraham, covenant with God, and then he has a son, Isaac. Isaac has a son, Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. His youngest son at the time is Joseph. Joseph isn't liked by his brothers. He's the son of a favorite wife, and so they sell him into slavery. There is actually a younger brother, that's Benjamin. But Joseph is his favorite son, coat of many colors, Donny Osmond, go Joseph, right? Okay, so Joseph is sold into Egypt, and then Joseph, because of his great character, rises through the ranks, series of circumstances, ends up being very powerful, second in command kind of thing in Egypt. Well, there's a famine, the remaining 10 brothers go down, a series of circumstances, and end result is, because of the famine, Joseph tells his brothers, bring all of the Israelites down, bring all of the family of Israel down and settle in Egypt. And so they do. So they come down and they settle in Egypt. And they stay there for 400 years. Okay. Now, over the course of the 400 years, this nation of Israel does a couple of things. One, they grow. Okay, because they're in a fertile area and they're successful farmers, and again, they're just people, they grow, and so that's one thing. And they fall out of favor with the Egyptians, to the point of whereas at one point they're like the favored family of a very high-ranking official, so that by the end of the 400 years they become slaves, and they're basically building pyramids for the Egyptians. Okay, Moses comes along. Moses was raised in the kingdom as a king. Moses comes along, let my people go. There's a series of challenges between Moses and Egypt, and ultimately Egypt lets Israel go, crosses the Red Sea splits, Egyptian army dies, and then Israel is in Egypt. Okay, now we're talking about Egypt. Okay, so that's kind of the world's fastest summary of that story. Now let's go through these first 15 verses. I'm going to read all 15 verses, then we're going to come back and talk about it. But as we listen to these, and one of the things, by the way, this is a side note. A lot of this stuff I could summarize, but I've decided that one of the things I want to do is I want to make sure that if you listen to this entire series, you will have heard every word of the book of Isaiah. Okay, and of course I'm using the ESV, not for great love of the ESV, but just because they've got the form that's useful for me. But you're going to hear every word. So let me read the first 15 verses, and then as you're listening to that, kind of think of what I just said relative to what happened between Israel and Egypt in the past, and maybe what you know of the story itself. Okay, so let's do that. An oracle concerning Egypt. Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and comes to Egypt, and the idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. And I will stir up Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they will fight each against another, and each against his neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. And the spirit of the Egyptians within them will be emptied out, and I will confound their counsel, and they will inquire of the idols and the sorcerers, and the mediums and the necromancers. And I will give over the Egyptians into the hand of a hard master, and a fierce king will rule over them, declares the Lord God of hosts. And the waters of the sea will be dried up, and the river will be dry and parched, and its canals will become foul, and the branches of Egypt's Nile will diminish and dry up. Reeds and rushes will rot away. There will be bare places by the Nile, on the brink of the Nile. And all that is sown by the Nile will be parched. All will be driven away and will be no more. The fishermen will mourn and lament, all who cast a hook in the Nile, and they will languish, who spread nets on the water. The workers in combed flax will be in despair, and the weavers of white cotton. Those who are the pillars of the land will be crushed, and all who work for pay will be grieved. The princes of Zon are utterly foolish. The wisest counselors of Pharaoh give stupid counsel. How can you say to Pharaoh, I am a son of the wise, a son of ancient kings? Where then are your wise men? Let them tell you, that they may know the what the Lord of hosts has purposed against Egypt. The princes of Zon have become fools, and the princes of Memphis are deluded. Those who are the cornerstone of her tribes have made Egypt stagger. The Lord has mingled within her a spirit of confusion, and they will make Egypt stagger in all its deeds as a drunken man staggers in his vomit. And there will be nothing for Egypt that head or tail, palm branch or reed may do. Okay, so did you hear any echoes of what had happened between Egypt and Israel in the past? Okay, so let's talk about those a little bit. Okay, so here, let's see, we talked about that. Okay, the first 4 verses kind of talk about what's happening in Israel, or what's happening in Egypt, and it could mean one of two things. It could be talking about some kind of a civil war, okay, that's going to happen. And this was very typical. Again, Egypt has been around for a very long time, and there's a lot of history of civil war and of, fratricide and regicide and all of these different rulers getting killed and taken over, and new regimes and split nations, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's not uncommon in a nation of that size, okay? But it could be talking about that. Or the Lord could just be making a comment, and I think this is more likely, that he's just sort of talking about the natural result of having the religious system that Egypt did. And Egypt has a religious system of very polytheistic, very many gods. God of this, God of that, God of light, God of darkness, God of the sun, God of the moon. Okay, all of these different gods ruling different small areas, different small fiefdoms, and kind of pointing out that ultimately that is just self-defeating. That this God having control over this doesn't help you when you're over here, and if this is the God you worship, but your problem is over here, then this God is, and it just becomes a real mess. And I think that's kind of, the Lord is saying, this is what it's going to be like. Your gods are just going to be fighting with each other because they're ineffectual. They're not going to be able to do anything. Okay. I stir up Egyptians against Egyptians, and the spirit of the Egyptians within them will be emptied out, and I will confound their counsel, and they will inquire of the idols and the sorcerers and the mediums and the necromancers. They're going to try and get explanations for what's going on. The Lord is saying, judgment is coming, and you're going to try and come up with an explanation for it. And you're just going to get contradictory messages. And I will give over the Egyptians into the hands of a hard master, and a fierce king will rule over them. So here, this is kind of interesting because this is sort of reminiscent of what happened to the Israelites under Egypt. Whereas at first they're there at the request, under the protection of the political leadership, Pharaoh, and of course Joseph at the time. And later there's a hard master, and this hard master is an Egyptian that is placed over them. Okay, so now he's saying, listen, just you're going to have a hard master put over you. Okay, and then you're going to kind of feel, how does it feel? Okay. Sort of thing, and so this is just sort of those listening, the original Jews who would have been hearing this would have said, oh yeah, just like what happened to us is what's going to happen to you. Okay, so that's sort of thing. I mean, look at it this way as an example. Okay, so today this is being played, originally on July 4th. Okay, and so if somebody were to write a letter or do an oracle about America and address it to the British people. Not that the British people want anything to do with us, the United States right now, but just for sake of discussion, let's say they do. And this British writer is going to talk to the British about what they're going to do to the Americans and say, yeah, we're going to go down there, we're going to find all of their tea, and we're going to just throw it in the water, all right, and then we're going to do this, 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 and this. Okay, so again, I'm assuming you know something about the American Revolution and how that all happened, but you had the British, the so-called Boston Tea Party, where so-called, patriots dressed up as Indians climbed on board the ship and threw the tea overboard. Okay, and so the British can look at it and go, yeah, exactly what happened. Yeah, just what they did to us, that's going to happen to you. Okay, so that's how it would resonate to them. Okay, to the original readers. Okay, now who is this hard master? Well, we don't really know. Okay, now again, it's one of the great parlor games of Isaiah interpretation to kind of say, oh, this is Sennacherib, or oh, this is Tiglath-Pileser, or oh, this is this person or that person. Okay, we really don't know, and I think I think the vagueness is there just so you can say, like, someday you're going to get a hard master. It could be anyone, and really whether or not you're a hard master is kind of relative to whatever your circumstances are. And if you've worked in any job at one point, you know that the boss who is just perfectly wonderful to one person is a hard taskmaster to someone else. Okay, so it's kind of relevant, and so relative to your own situation here, but you're going to have this happen to you. All right, and then verses 5 through let's see, how far does that go? 5 through 10 are just talking about what's going to happen to the Nile River. Now, the thing about the Nile River is that the nation of Egypt is completely dependent on it. Okay, that's it. Without the Nile River, there'd be next to no Egypt. And the other thing about it is that at the time, and I believe it's still true that today, that it's very predictable in how it works. So this water travels north, but because of rains in the south or upper Egypt, because of the rains there, it floods, and it floods tremendously. Okay, it isn't just like a little high water, a little over the edge. I mean, it's like way across. I mean, I don't know if you remember seeing pictures of the Mississippi. Back in '93. Debbie and I went down to there was a big flood in the Mississippi that year, and I remember driving over and just seeing the water just spread way over. Okay, so and what happens when it floods is it brings that silt up and it fertilizes the ground. They plant. When it recedes, they plant, they grow things, and then they wait a year, and they can predict it like to the week. Okay, when it's going to happen. Like this is the first week of June, this is going to happen, okay, every year. And if that were to happen, then it would be devastating for the nation of Egypt. And that's kind of what the Lord is saying. And here Isaiah is saying that you guys are so dependent on something that is strictly by the grace of God, that the rains come. If the rains didn't come in the south, boom. And if you got somebody who can stop the rain, then they can destroy you. And of course, Go to the New Testament story. What manner with Jesus calms the wind and the storms, and the disciples say, "What manner of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." And he stops the storms. It's like, whoa, this guy can stop the rain. Okay, go to the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel with the rain and all of that, and holding the rain, kind of thing. So I mean, it's pretty clear throughout the Bible that God is indicated as somebody who can withhold the rain. And he said, all that God has to do is withhold the rain, and that's boom. It's going to be devastating. It's interesting, just all that is so, just look at the various levels of devastation here. Waters of the sea, the river will be dry. There will be bare places by the Nile, on the brink of the Nile. Okay, there's places where you should be planting things are going to be bare, because there's not going to be, there's no moisture to plant things. All that is sown will be parched. The fishermen will mourn and lament, all who cast the hook in the Nile, and they will languish. Okay, so again, it's going to affect, whatever happens is going to affect the fishing industry, so to speak, out of the Nile River. The workers in combed flax will be in despair. Okay, flax is the plant from which they draw thread, which they use to create clothes. Okay, fabric. That's the word I'm looking for. You ever had one of those moments where you just can't remember the word fabric, and then they use the fabric to make clothes. Okay, so this is going to be devastated. Okay, those who are the pillars of the land will be crushed. Okay, those who the political leaders, the pharaoh, the rulers, are going to be crushed, and all who work for pay will be grieved. Okay, so again, it's just everybody who makes their living off of the Nile River, and that's pretty much the entire nation of Israel. I'm sorry, the entire nation of Egypt. Okay, it's interesting because the Septuagint translates this passage. And again, the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so the translates this, all who work for pay, as those who make beer, because that's the Septuagint translation. That's an English translation of the Septuagint translation. And the King James translated says those who make sluice. Okay, so it's, but I think the better translation here is what is in the ESV, and it's consistent with what's in the NIV. This idea of anyone who works for pay. So whoever's livelihood depends on the Nile River is going to be grieved. Okay, the princes of Zon are utterly foolish. The wisest counselors of Pharaoh give stupid counsel. So Isaiah, don't hold back, Isaiah. Tell us what you really think, right? It says, now what is Zon? Zon is a city on the northern or lower portion of the Nile. Okay, and in fact, it would be the first city that a major city that a Hebrew or a Semite traveling from Israel coming into Egypt would have come to. Okay, it's their first major city that they would have come to. So that's why they would be very familiar with it. Okay, so he said the rulers, and there have been times when, we talk about Cairo and now being the capital, but there were times like during divisions at one point Zone was the capital of like the the lower Nile area. So again, it's a major city, and so is Memphis mentioned down a little later. It says, I am a son of the wise. Where then are your wise men? Let them tell you. Now, again, here's another little throwback, because there were times in the Exodus story where Moses does something and the Pharaoh says, "Oh, my people can do that," and he goes to his people for explanation of what's going on. Okay, so kind of similar, and the Lord says, "Yeah, your wise men, these guys who know all of this stuff, where are they?" The princess of Zoan, the Lord has mingled within her a spirit of confusion. It's kind of not so much intentional, just like, okay, fine, that's how you want to be. If you want to worship all these guys, go ahead. Okay, not unlike what happened in Babel in Genesis. And they will make Egypt stagger in all its deeds, and a drunken man staggers in his vomit. Okay, a pretty graphic image here of what Egypt is going to become. But a lot of this is just the result of so many people giving so many contradictory ideas, and a certain number of people are following over there, and a certain number of people are following over here, kind of stuff. And it's like, it's not unlike, nowadays you got somebody who's dead set follower of this particular philosophy or this particular person or this particular, and he or she runs up against this person who's a definite follower of this person versus that person, and they're all just kind of 2 or 3 ships passing in the night. Okay, kind of that's sort of what's going to happen to Egypt. Okay, and there will be nothing for Egypt that head or tail, palm branch or reed may do. Again, reference back to an earlier passage in chapter 9 where we talked about that palm head, reed tail kind of thing. Okay. However, there's going to be a turn, and I think one commentator, Dielitz, I believe it was, talked about this chapter and said the first half is going into the pit, and the second half is coming out of the pit. And so now there's a prophecy. In fact, there's 5 in that day pronouncements to say of Egypt. Listen, at some point after this judgment, here's what's going to happen to Egypt. Okay, and there's 5 times it says in that day. Okay, in that day. Where am I? In that day, the Egyptians will be like women and tremble with fear before the hand of the Lord of hosts shakes over them. And the land of Judah will become a terror to the Egyptians. Everyone to whom it is mentioned will fear because of the purpose that the Lord has purposed against them. Okay, again, recognizing that purpose section. Remember we talked about that in chapter 14, where what I purposed was the purpose and all that. Okay, so Judah is going to become a terror to Egypt, just like Egypt had become a terror to the Israelites. Okay, in that day there will be in that day there will be 5 cities in the land of Egypt that speak the language of Canaan and swear allegiance to the Lord of hosts. One of these will be called the city of destruction. Okay, 2 things to consider here. Okay, the easiest read of this passage is to say that of all of the cities in Egypt, and there's anywhere from 1,000 to 30,000 depending on who you ask, 5 of them will become so converted, let's use that word, to true belief that they will actually speak the language of Canaan. That is, speak what the Canaanites, and this is not necessarily talking about Canaanites, is where the Jews are coming from. Okay, and swear allegiance to the Lord of hosts. Okay, or the 5 could just mean a symbolic number, or a disproportionate number. In Leviticus, there's a passage talking about how 5 will chase 100. Okay, that's 5 in the world of numerology and number study. That 5 generally is a kind of a general term. They pick 5. Okay, could be, or it could be that just of all the cities, there's going to be 5. Either one is acceptable. The easiest and is just there will be 5. This many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So that's something to look at. Now, one of these cities will be called the city of destruction. Okay, here it's an interesting thing. So here we're in this passage of hope, and the talk is, well, one of these is called the city of destruction. Okay, now this is what there's an interesting textual thing here, because there's different variants, and again, a variant is that when you have all of these different manuscript copies, and one variant says that one word is this at this point, one word is this, and one word is this. These are called variants. And then there's a whole point of textual criticism is to try and compare the one against the other and try and figure out which one best represents what was originally written. Okay, and this is one of those questions. Okay, so there's another variant, pretty popular, pretty widespread, like 15 major manuscripts has this as being, one of them will be called the city of the sun, sun like the sun in the sky, sun. Okay, and there's another variant, not quite as popular, or not quite as many, where it's the city of righteousness. Okay, and several, now again, the ESV says it's the city of destruction. The NIV, and I like the NIV translations. I learned this because I've got an NIV sitting over here. You can't see it, but it's right there. The NIV variant calls it the city of the sun. Okay, and again, this is kind of, that, when we talk about the city of the sun, it's bright, it's light, it's hope kind of thing. And I think that's more consistent with the picture that is happening in this passage. In that day there will be an altar, verse 19, in that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. It's kind of interesting because if you remember the story of Egypt and the slaves, what did they want to do at some point? The request wasn't, let my people go so that we can leave you and never come back. In some of the earlier requests, it was, let us go out into the desert to build an altar and worship. That's what they wanted to do. They didn't say they wanted to leave. They just said, let's go build an altar to worship. Okay. But then when they did finally leave, and I'm skipping over a lot of stuff, they did get out and they got through the Red Sea, and they built a pillar to memorialize it. Okay, so there was at one point a pillar, and now it says there's going to be a pillar again at the border to represent the Lord. See, where am I? It will be a sign and a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt, when they, that is the people of Israel, the people in Egypt, cry out to the Lord because of oppressors. He will send them a savior and defender and deliver them. Okay. Now this is kind of, harkens back to another period in Jewish history, and that is the period of the Judges. Okay, where they had oppressors, and they were sent. The oppressor would come out, and then they would send, Jephthah and Samson and Gideon and all these guys in the book of Judges. Okay, and the Lord will strike Egypt, striking and healing, and they will return to the Lord, and He will listen to their mercies, pleas for mercy, and heal them. In that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. And Assyria will come into Egypt, and Egypt into Assyria. The Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. Again, so Assyria is to the north, Egypt is to the south. Right in the middle, what's in the middle? Israel, the highway. Okay, so that things will be so good between all of these countries that they will just kind of walk through like no border, no passports, nothing. It's like the common market. Okay, it's like the European Union. Okay, you're all going to get along. Okay. In that day, Israel would be the third with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth. Okay, so again, this was always always Israel's goal, that they were to be a blessing, that they were to bring the message of the Lord to the nations. Okay, and here the Lord is saying, listen, part of my purpose is that's what's going to happen. Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. Okay, so at some point, there's going to be great. All right. Let me go to chapter 20, just this last thing. And this is just a brief story of something that happens, okay? And I'll just read it. It's the first 6 verses. Well, it's the only 6 verses, and then we'll talk about it and then be done for the day. In the year that the commander-in-chief, who was sent by Sargon, the king of Assyria, came to Ashdod and fought against it and captured it, at that time the Lord spoke by Isaiah the son of Amos, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from your waist and take off your sandals from your feet. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. Then the Lord said, As my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot for 3 years as a sign and a portent against Egypt and Cush, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian captives and the Cushite exiles, both the young and the old, naked and barefoot, with buttocks uncovered, the nakedness of Egypt. Then they shall be dismayed and ashamed because of Cush their hope, and of Egypt their boast. And the inhabitants of this coastline will say in that day, Behold, this is what happened to those in whom we hoped, and to whom we fled for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria. And how shall we escape? Okay, let me break this down a little bit. Okay, Ashdod. Ashdod is a city in Philistia. Okay, now they're talking about Assyria taking over, that Assyria comes down and attacks Philistia, and that ultimately is going to take it over. Okay, remember what we talked about when we talked about Philistia there back in chapter 14:31, that your smoke comes from the north. Assyria is coming down from the north and attacks Philistia. Okay, and when this happens, the Lord says to Isaiah, says, listen, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go barefoot. I want you to kind of pull up your waistcloth up high. Okay. Now, there's all kinds of fun ways to try and discuss what he's actually doing. The easiest thing is to say, pull up your waistcoat, and at this time when he's writing, there was partial nudity or nudity, being naked, was kind of the same thing. Okay, if one part of you was seen, they just said you're naked. Okay, so it's highly doubtful that he was like completely naked walking around, but he could have been. Okay, for all, we don't know, but it's kind of doubtful. And also the construction for 3 years actually tends more later to the idea that for 3 years he reminded you of this. So it's probably likely that at one point God told Isaiah to do this. Okay, so basically here's what it is. Ashdod gets attacked from Philistia, and they put their trust, they create an alliance with Egypt, that they think Egypt is going to rescue them from the Assyrians. Okay, well, it doesn't work. Okay, and Isaiah is telling them that. He's saying, listen, this is how Assyria is going to carry you away. You're going to be humiliated like this. Okay, and Isaiah does this. Now, this is the only time we have Isaiah doing something like this, but in other Old Testament prophets, you've got these kind of things. Jeremiah buries a belt for 3 years and puts it on and walks around with it. Okay, so this is just a visual thing that the Lord does and sends it out there and says, go tell Ashdod this. So this seems something that Isaiah actually did. So somehow he was able to communicate with Ashdod and let them know this is how Assyria is going to carry you away. Trusting in Egypt is a mistake. Okay. Then they shall be dismayed and ashamed because of Cush their hope, and of Egypt their boast. So maybe they're like, hey, Philistia, I've got a big friend and it's Egypt, and and then Egypt fails. Okay. And behold, this is what happened to those in whom we hoped and in whom we trusted, and to whom we fled for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and it failed. Okay, so finally, let me just make this point. This is going back to a bigger theme of Isaiah, and that is, who are you going to trust? Okay, and throughout this is in 7 through 9, it's like, Ahaz, who are you going to trust? And I'm going to trust my political connections. And the Lord says, no, your political connections aren't going to work. Here, Ashdod had the opportunity, and Isaiah's there, and he's telling them, so, Ashdod and Philistia had a chance, but no, they said, no, I'm going to trust our political connections. Who are you going to trust? Okay, and throughout the book of Isaiah, you have this message that trusting in anyone other than the Lord is a waste of time, is counterproductive, is a dumb idea. Okay, now the Bible says, and again, we can take this personally. Proverbs 3:5, a very well-known verse. You probably memorized it as a kid. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not in your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Okay, this is just a message that we see illustrated in Isaiah, that who are you going to trust? And the original readers would have looked and said, oh, we should trust God. That's who we should be trusting. Okay, so today is July 4th, so that's when this is going out. So it's like you can look at your who are you trusting, and I've mentioned this kind of thing before. I mean, are you trusting the political parties of the day to make your point for you, or to do your work for you, or to do God's work for you? Okay, again, every time somebody trusts a political alliance here in Isaiah, it fails miserably. So, all right, well, we'll get on talking about Babylon next. We're going to get back to talking about Babylon in chapter 21, I believe. Continuing on as we move up to the next big event, although I think actually there's a couple of We haven't had a greatest hit, but I think we have another one coming up next week when we talk about Isaiah 21. So, all right, well, that's it. I hope you guys have a great 4th of July, and I'll talk to you all later.